The Assembly is now in session. Assemblymember Holden notices the absence of a quorum. The Sergeants-at-Arms will prepare the chamber and bring the absent members. The clerk will call the roll.
Ashajian, Alejo, Allen, Baker, Bigelow, Bloom, Bonilla, Bonta, Bro, Brown, Burke, Calderon, Campos, Chang, Chow, Chavez, David Chu, Canson Chu, Cooley, Cooper, Dababne, Daly, Daly, Dodd, Eggman, Frazier, Gaines, Gallagher, Cristina Garcia, Eduardo Garcia, Gatto, Gibson, Gomez, Gonzalez, Gordon, Gray, Grove, Hadley, Harper, Hernandez, Holden, Irwin, Jones, Jones Sawyer, Kim, Lackey, Levine, Linder, Lopez, Lowe, Mainshine, Mathis, Mays, McCarty, Medina, Melendez, Mullen, Nazarian, Obernolte, O'Donnell, Olson, Patterson, Perea, Quirk, Rendon, Ridley Thomas, Rodriguez, Salas, Santiago, Steinorth, Stone, Thurmond, Ting, Wagner, Waldron, Weber, Wilk, Williams, Wood. Madam Speaker.
Members, a quorum is present. A quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. The day's prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Assemblymember Rich Gordon. Mr. Gordon.
Heavenly Father, we ask for the capacity to deal constructively with reality, the capacity and understanding to adapt to change. We ask for a relative freedom from the symptoms produced by our tensions and anxieties. We ask for the capacity to find more satisfaction in giving. And we ask for the capacity to live a life that honors our brothers and sisters and you. Amen.
Thank you, Assemblymember Gordon. We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Please join Assemblymember Olson as she leads us in the pledge. Ms. Olson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, April 9th, 2015. The Assembly met at 9 a.m. Honorable David Chu, Assistant Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E. Dotson Wilson at the desk. Reading Clerk Kathleen M. Lewis reading. The roll was called. Assemblymember Lopez moved a quorum call at the Assembly.
Mr. Holden moves. Ms. Olson seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor? There are none. Messages from the Senate? There are none. Moving to motions and resolutions, the absences for the day. For illness, Assembly Member Quirk. Mr. Holden, you are recognized for your motions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 and allow Speaker Atkins, Assembly Members Alejo, Eggman, Cooper, Levine, and McCarty to have guests and photographers on the floor today.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 and allow Speaker Atkins and Assembly Members Eggman, Gonzalez, Gordon, and Wood to speak on adjourn in memory today.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Pursuant to Assembly Rule 96, I request unanimous consent to re-refer the following bills to committee. Assembly Bill 674, Mullen, from Appropriations Committee to the Natural Resources Committee. Assembly Bill 828, Lowe and Chang, from the Utilities and Commerce Committee to the Transportation Committee only. Assembly Bill 1011, O'Donnell, from the Accountability and Administrative Review Committee to the Rules Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Pursuant to Assembly Rule 97, I request unanimous consent to re-refer file item 91 AB 1119 Rendon to the Local Government Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, if we'd have your attention for guest introductions. Madam Speaker, you are recognized for your guest introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We have a bittersweet honor today to recognize a very special guest with us here in the Assembly Chamber. The Consul General of Japan, Masato Watanabe, is visiting the state capitol to bid us farewell today. After a very productive assignment in San Francisco, Mr. Watanabe will be returning to Tokyo next month to await his next assignment. To many of us, Masato Watanabe is an incredibly familiar face here that we have seen throughout the halls of the Capitol. We've had the pleasure of collaborating with him on some very important issues, and we've been fortunate to work together to promote mutual understanding between California and Japan. He's helped to strengthen the friendship between Japan and California through support for cultural programs and exchanges. Last year, for instance, many of us had the pleasure of meeting with representatives of the Japan-California Parliamentary Friendship League, which is a group of members of the Japanese National Diet's House of Chancellors that work to strengthen the relationship between Japan and California. Mr. Watanabe, on behalf of my colleagues in the State Assembly, we want to thank you for your service. Please know that as you begin the next chapter, you will have many friends here in Sacramento that will miss you. Members, please join me in recognizing the Honorable Masato Watanabe, the Consul General of Japan in San Francisco.
Members, if we could have your attention. Mr. Levine has guests with us in the Assembly today. Mr. Levine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm honored today to introduce my Woman of the Year, Ms. Kim Mizuka. Kim Mizuka is the president of 10,000 Degrees, a program that helps underprivileged, underserved children graduate from high school and graduate from college, and I'm honored to have her here today.
Members, we are going to move to business on the daily file. Second reading, the clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 675, 40, 674 with amendments, 793 with amendments, 143 with amendments, 226 with amendments, 572 with amendments, 614 with amendments, 865 with amendments, 1328, 649 with amendments, 165, 234, 256, 273, 275, 365, 400, 701, 804, 1245, 72, 81, 163, 195, 220, 224, 249, 274, 354, 362, 370, 394, 424, 444, 467, 489, 503, 546, 860, 893, 991, 1105, 1303, 1432, 1514.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. We are moving to Assembly third reading. File items 64 through 67, pass and retain. Moving to file item 68 for the purpose of amendments. Clerk will read with amendments.
Assembly Bill 267 with amendments by Assemblymember Jones Sawyer.
Mr. Jones Sawyer, you may open on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I rise today for the purposes of amendments. These amendments narrow the list of advisements the court will be required to review with a defendant during the plea bargaining process. Specifically, I'm striking the foreign travel restriction and immigration advisement. Current law already requires a judge to issue an immigration advisement to a defendant. These amendments were discussed in Public Safety Committee. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Ms. Waldron.
We are supporting the amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Waldron. Without objection, we may take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. Bill is out to print and back on file. File item 69. File item 69 is a pass and retain. Moving to file item 70. AB 637. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 637 by Assemblymember Campos, an act relating to resuscitative measures.
Members will pass temporarily on file item 70. Moving to file item 71. AB 863. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 863 by Assemblymember Dodd and others, an act relating to modified limousines.
Mr. Dodd, you may open.
Mr. Speaker and members, in 2013 and 2014, the legislature established new emergency exit and safety requirements for limousines. The intent of the previous legislation was to require pop-out windows in all limousines, but to apply additional exit door requirements only on limousines manufactured after July 2015. an inadvertent drafting error in the original legislation applied the exit door requirement to all limousines. Requiring existing vehicles to be retrofitted for a fifth door is an enormous expense and excessive burden on limousine businesses. Specifically, AB 863 does two things. Clarifies that only new limousines are required to have a fifth door, and then delays the implementation for existing modified vehicles from January 1st, 2016 to January 1st, 2017. This bill got out of Assembly Transportation with unanimous bipartisan support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. Ayes 76, no 0. Measure passes. Members, we are going to be moving up in the file to file item 86. File item 86. That's ACR 34 by Mr. Cooper. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 34 by Assemblymember Cooper and others relative to the November 1984 anti-Sikh pogroms.
Mr. Cooper, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. In November of 1984, over 3,000 Sikhs were murdered throughout India. Eyewitnesses, journalists, and human rights activists have compiled evidence showing that government and law enforcement organized, participated in, and failed to intervene to prevent the killing of Sikhs. Sikhs were beaten with iron rods. They were forcibly shorn of their hair, which Sikhs religiously are required to maintain uncut, doused with kerosene, and set on fire. Sikh women, many of whom lost their husbands, sons, and fathers during the pogroms were gang raped and sexually assaulted by the attackers. Sikh homes, businesses, and houses of worship were looted, damaged, and destroyed during the violence. Individuals and organizations throughout the world, recognizing the need for justice, continue to demand the prosecution for those responsible for the November 1984 anti-Sikh genocide. This resolution, ACR 34, recognizes those who lost their lives during the 1984 anti-Sikh genocide, and two members who were escaped with their lives are here today. I ask for your aye vote and request that the first roll be opened for co-authors.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Levine, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of ACR 34 and thank the author for bringing forward this important measure. The massacre in India resulted in almost 2,800 deaths. More than 2,100 deaths were in Delhi alone. This systematic act of hate and political and racist revenge caused more than 20,000 Sikhs to flee their homes in Delhi. To this day, many Sikhs in India still live in fear. It is important that we remember this massacre. It is also important that we recognize what happened and keep in mind that it was only 30 years ago. We need to remember that many of those who were responsible for the gross human rights violations and loss of life are still alive today and have yet to be held accountable. By having this public discussion and remembrance, let us further the public call for justice. Until there is acknowledgement, atonement, and reconciliation for the massacre, many of the more than 21 million Sikhs that live in India will continue to feel alienated and targeted. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Ms. Eggman, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I, too, rise in support of ACR 34. In the city of Stockton Sikh Temple was the first of its kind in the entire United States. It was established in 1912 following a meeting in the still small community of Holt, where local Sikhs formed a committee to raise funds for the temple's construction. They bought land on Stockton South Grant Street, which I am proud to be a part of renaming Sikh Temple Street when I was on the city council. The Sikh community's advocacy for that name change was a model of inclusion. They held meetings with their neighbors who feared change and did their best to allay those concerns. They have brought the city together after incidences of terrible violence and also invited others to visit and participate in their annual festival, which weaves throughout downtown Stockton and throughout our south side to Sikh Temple Street. Stockton treasures its Sikh community as much as any other, but the location of the first Sikh temple in America gives it special significance. I am humbled to be able to join my colleagues today in decrying the anti-Sikh programs of 1984, and I'm also humbled to celebrate my city's status as the Plymouth Rock of the first American Sikh community. And we also have leaders from our Sikh temple here with us today.
Thank you, Ms. Eggman. Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized from your desk.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to thank my colleague from Elk Grove for bringing forward this important resolution in which we remember and recognize the pogroms that claimed the lives of thousands of Sikhs throughout India in 1985. It is important that we recognize the need for justice and remember the lives lost due to this massacre. The best way to combat evil is to confront it and to shine a light upon it. And we do this by speaking truth. The light of truth extinguishes the darkness. It is also important that we recognize the numerous significant contributions made by the Sikh community to our beloved state to this very day. My district in the Sacramento Valley is home to one of the largest Sikh populations in the United States, and they are well known for their active role in agricultural advancements. But in addition to agriculture, Sikhs have played a role in almost every industry in this state, including high technology, medicine, trucking. Their contribution to California's economy and job development is increasing with each passing year as a number of Sikh entrepreneurs, business owners, and farmers continue to rise. In addition, their desire to spread awareness about their religion and culture while at the same time integrating and assimilating into American culture is exemplary. They are some of the most patriotic Americans I know. My own life has been enriched by the Sikh people that I have known and called friend. And I'll be happy to introduce you to some of those friends here a little bit later. Thank you. Ask for your...
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Ms. Cooley, you are recognized.
Colleagues, I want to rise in support of ACR 34 to memorialize the history of the Sikhs in India, this pogrom of 1982 or 1984. I know in my community the Sikhs are a compassionate and generous people, and their temples are a place of refuge. And so it is an especial affront that this kind and generous and caring people would be victimized in this way. It happened in India. We've seen murders of Sikhs just going about their daily business. And I think it's inexplicable why this happens. But colleagues, I know that there are many faiths in this world. Pretty much all believe we live our life today and someday we will be held accountable. And this can be summarized in the expression, there is today, there is that day, and I want to live my life today for that day. And at its core, in all ethics, if we are going to live our life with a view to some day of accountability, then we will live our life in such a way as to honor all people we encounter, to see the value in them, to uphold the value in them, to affirm the value in them. And this is what we all need. And I thank you for bringing forth this resolution, which reminds us that that is not how all live their lives, but it's certainly what we want to affirm on this floor, this honoring of people for their intrinsic worth and merit and value. Thank you.
Mr. Kansan Chu, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers and members. As I do want to rise to show my appreciation to many of the Sikh community and their contribution in the making of Silicon Valley and in our local economy. So thank you very much, Assembly Member Cooper, to bring this one up to us.
Ms. Olson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I, too, rise in support of ACR 34 to decry the violence of 1984 that occurred against the Sikh community, appreciate the author for bringing this new way forward for us to, again, remember those who lost their lives, honor the survivors, and to honor those in the Sikh community that have chosen to reestablish lives here in California. I, too, have one of the districts, along with a couple of colleagues of mine who spoke, that is one of the most populous areas in our state for the Sikh community. They are so active in the business community, in the education community, in public office. One of our outstanding mayors is from the Sikh community, and so appreciate the contributions they make to us here in California, across the United States, and take this time to remember those who were lost and to honor the survivors. Thank you for bringing ACR 34 forward, and ask for an aye vote from all of us.
Seeing no further discussion or debate, Mr. Cooper, you may close on the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleagues for their kind and thoughtful comments. I ask for your aye vote and request that the first roll be open for co-authors.
Mr. Cooper is asking that the first roll be open for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. The clerk will open the roll. All members wishing to add as co-authors on ACR 34. All members vote or desire to vote. Co-authors on ACR 34. There are 76 co-authors added on ACR 34. Without objection, we may take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Mr. Cooper, I will go back to you for guest introductions. Members, a number of us on the floor have guest introductions today. Relative to this resolution, I would ask that the guests, after the introduction, remain standing. And members, please hold your applause until the end of the introductions so we may acknowledge our guests. At that point, Mr. Cooper, back to your desk for your guest introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to welcome guests joining us today in the gallery in the rear of the chambers. We have visitors representing the Stockton Sikh Temple, the West Sacramento Sikh Temple, and also individuals from the Elk Grove, Sacramento, and Stockton Sikh communities. On behalf of Assemblymember Eggman and myself, welcome to the Assembly, and thank you for joining us. We have Amar Shergill, Goli Shergill, Sansara Shergill, Harjeet Kaur, Pulvinder Kaur, Surjit Dhillon, Mike Bopari, Paul Uppal, Sarbit Singh, and Bujin Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Chu, Kansan Chu, you are recognized for your guest introductions.
Thank you very much, Speaker and the members. I rise to introduce a delegation from the Silicon Valley led by T.J. Adami. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized for your guest introductions.
Mr. Speaker, from the mighty Sacramento Valley, I have some great friends with me today, members. First, I'd like to recognize Mr. Didar Baines and his family that are with us today. Mr. Baines is the former president of the World Sikh Organization, a farmer in Yuba City and well-known community leader who helped found and organize the Terra Buena Gurdwara and the Sikh parade that draws nearly 100,000 Sikhs worldwide to Yuba City each year. He's joined by his family, his sons Ajit and Karm Baines, and his granddaughter Alondra Baines. I also have with us some members from the Punjabi American Heritage Society. I have Dr. Jasbir Kang and his wife Sukhjit Kang. I have Hardeep Singh, and also Kulwant Joel and his wife Jaspal Joel. And the Punjabi American Heritage Association has been critical in our community. This association helps bring awareness about Sikh issues and helps connect the younger generations to stay connected to their roots. They've also been putting on a Punjabi American Festival in Yuba City since 1995 and helped to put together a first-of-its-kind Punjabi American exhibit in the Sutter County Museum. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Members, please hold your applause. Members, please hold your applause. We have another guest introduction related to the resolution. Mr. McCarty, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we recognize the ACR 34 and the Sikh genocide and remember the past, I want to introduce two members of the Sacramento Sikh Temple, Mr. Darshan Singh Mundi, Mr. Balbir Singh Dillon, both leaders in the West Sacramento Greater Yolo community. And it's my pleasure also to introduce a survivor of the 1984 Sikh massacre, Mr. Saran Singh Chawla. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If our Sikh American guests could please stand to be acknowledged, members, let's acknowledge all of our guests with a round of applause.